One of our speakers mentioned that we should be moving into the 21st century. We'll take a moment now to move back to the 19th century as we celebrate 175 plus years of Lafayette history. And we're very happy to have with us in person this time, Mary McCosker, president of the Lafayette Historical Society, to give us our third lesson in Lafayette history. Welcome.
Thank you. I just need my PowerPoint on the screen. Aha, there it is. So we have gone through the period when the Spanish explorers came. We have gone through the Mexican era, and now we're about to hear about the Yankees who came from the East. This is a map of the United States in the early 1820s. There were only 24 states, shown in pink, in the United States at this time. The large gray area is land that was claimed by Mexico. But the Spanish had already arrived in the late 1770s and had built 21 settlements, missions, and presidios up the coast of today's California, which led to a conflict between Mexico and Spain in the early 1880s and resulted in Mexican independence. After the war, many Spanish people returned to Spain, but some liked it so well in California that they became Mexican citizens. The Mexican government rewarded some of their soldiers who had fought bravely against Spain by giving them a piece of land. A Mexican sergeant named Candelario Valencia was given Rancho Acalanes, 3,300 acres of land where most of Lafayette is found today. You can see Rancho Acalanes on this map. It is the small rectangle with the red X in it. There are other ranchos on this map. A nearby one is Rancho Cañada de los Palos Colorados. Burton Valley is located in this rancho, as is Moraga and some of Orinda. Valencia eventually sold the land to a man from San Francisco named William Leidesdorf, who was a builder of ships and tall buildings. He only owned the land for 6 months before he sold it to a Yankee who had come cross-country by wagon train. Here are the stars of Lafayette history, Elam Brown and Margaret Allen. They made a difficult 6-month journey by covered wagon to the West Coast. Elam Brown was born in New York and had lived in Massachusetts, Illinois, and Kentucky. He was a farmer, but had not been particularly successful. His wife, Sarah, had died while they lived in Kentucky. One of his older sons had gone west to the Oregon Territory and had written to his father, telling him of the cheap, fertile land for sale there. Crops could not be grown on the East Coast in the winter because of the cold weather, but crops could grow in the milder winters on the West Coast. Elam decided that he would start his life over by moving west. Other families and friends also decided to go west. One family were the Allens, Margaret and Isaac. They had known the Browns in Kentucky. Margaret and Isaac Allen had 11 children, some of whom traveled west with the wagon train. The wagon train prepared for their trip near St. Joseph, Missouri, purchasing wagons, oxen, and supplies they would need for the journey. Each wagon was pulled by a team of 4 oxen. There were only dirt trails for roads, and they were very rutted and dusty. Some people had horses to ride, but most people going west walked alongside the wagons for up to 10 miles a day. The weather was often very hot, especially during the summer months. The journey from Missouri to the West Coast took about 6 months. When the travelers came to a river or a stream, they would often rest for a day, bathing and washing clothes in the river. The animals could rest too. These are some things that might have been carried in a covered wagon, besides clothing, bedding, and small pieces of furniture. Wooden barrels would be filled with flour for baking or beans for cooking in the big iron pot over a fire, an oil lamp to give light at night, a butter churn to make butter from cream if there was a dairy cow on the trip, and bottles filled with medicine. On May 1st, 1846, A wagon train of 14 families in 16 covered wagons began the 6-month journey from St. Joseph, Missouri, to a new beginning in the West. Elam Brown and Isaac Allen were co-captains of this wagon train. The Oregon Trail was the route taken by most pioneers heading west. There were U.S. Army forts along the Oregon Trail, where the pioneers could stop for supplies, for repairs, or for medical aid. As they neared Fort Bridger in Wyoming, many of the group became ill with plains or typhoid fever from drinking contaminated water. One very sick person was Margaret Allen's son, Andrew. He was left at Fort Bridger since he was too ill to travel. The wagon train had to keep moving west in order to cross the mountain ranges before winter snow. When the group arrived at Fort Hall, they met travelers coming down the Oregon Trail who told them that there hadn't been much rain the winter before, so there was little grass growing along the trail. This meant that the animals, oxen, horses, cows, might not get enough to eat and grow weak. The leaders of the group decided that it would be safer to take the California Trail to the south, so the wagon train set off for California. As they traveled in Nevada, others in the group became ill. Isaac Allen, Margaret's husband, died of the disease and was buried near the trail. Margaret too became ill, but survived. Her daughter-in-law, wife of Andrew, died in childbirth, so Margaret had to then care for a newborn baby. Other people in the wagon train also were sick, and some died on the way to California. Once they made it over the mountains, the Sierras, Elam and Margaret came into the Sacramento Valley. They were married in late 1846. It was probably a marriage of convenience, as they were both without spouses and in their 50s. They spent time in the Bay Area, where Elam worked as a redwood logger. They heard about Rancho Acalanes that was for sale and purchased it from William Leidesdorf for $900, with 300 cattle included for free. This is the clock that Margaret Allen brought in her wagon. It is an 8-day clock because it needs to be wound with a key every 8 days. In behind the glass door and the pendulum was a secret compartment where Margaret had hidden money to purchase land when her family arrived on the West Coast. Elam and Margaret came to this area to see the land they had purchased. It was February of 1848, and obviously the weather was cold. They drove their wagons up today's Happy Valley Road and found a flat piece of land near a creek where they set up their household, living in a very primitive shack. This marker on Happy Valley Road shows where they built their first home. While Elam built a shelter, Margaret cooked a pot of stew over the fire. They lived here for several years while Elam started the first business in Lafayette, a grist mill where farmers could bring their grain to have it ground into flour. Prior to his building this grist mill, farmers had to take their grain to San Jose, so it was a week's trip each way to have it ground, so this really improved life for them. As the tiny community began to grow, Elam decided to build another grist mill closer to the downtown area. He had also discovered that the nearby creek dried up during the summer months, leaving them without a reliable source of water. When Elam told Margaret they were going to move closer to town, she replied, "I'm not moving unless you build me a house with wooden floors." Here is the house with the wooden floors. The floors in the Happy Valley house were of dirt, so this would have been a wonderful improvement for Margaret. This house is no longer standing in Lafayette, but its location is known. There is a lane that runs between the public house and the coop. The Browns' house was at the end of the lane, built right near the creek that provided a source of water. There is a plaque that is near the public house that tells about Elam and Margaret's Brown's lives in Lafayette. Brown Avenue runs between Deer Hill Road and Mount Diablo Boulevard and takes its name from the Brown family. The graves of Elam and Margaret ought to be in our Lafayette Cemetery, but they are buried in Martinez. Elam's son Warren settled in Martinez and wished for his father and stepmother to be buried near where he lived. So they are both buried in the Brown family plot in the Pioneer Cemetery on the hill. Elam lived to the age of 92 and Margaret to 89. Elam served as alcalde of the district, a mayor of sorts for the area, and was a member of the state constitutional convention and acted as a state assemblyman in California's first two legislatures. He sponsored legislation by which Americans could gain control of Indian people and their land. To safeguard its citizens during the process, the law also included a provision stating that no white man could be convicted upon the testimony of an Indian. Any protections that had existed under the Spanish and Mexican governments were now completely gone. What advances were made during his tenure in the early history of California mainly benefited white people to the detriment of the indigenous people. And now, come back next month and we'll talk about early downtown.
Are there questions for the speaker, for Mary?
Mary, will that be available? Is that going to be available on the website or?
We kind of have parts of that on the website.
Oh, okay.
If you look on the, there's a 175+ page on our website, and it has a lot of information about the utility, about the
Okay, Suzanne, there was a question about whether this would be available on the website. Mary was responding with respect to the Historical Society's website. I'm wondering, can we have a spot on the Lafayette City website for these presentations? Okay, great. The answer was yes. So we'll have them available there. Yes. Okay, great. All right. Is there anyone online who has a question?
No additional speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. We look forward to April 10th.